It started as a roar. Trump's voice filled the room, calling Kennedy a fraud, a lightweight, a man unfit for the fight. Cameras swarmed, the audience leaned in, and the former president smirked, certain he had landed the knockout blow. The room laughed with him for a moment. Then Kennedy moved. He reached for a folder, slid out a stack of pages, and began to read line by line. They weren't his words. They weren't rumors. They were Trump's own tax documents. And when the numbers spilled into the air, the laughter stopped cold. Stay with us, and if you haven't yet, hit subscribe, because this confrontation only gets sharper from here. The stage wasn't neutral. It was built for a clash. The chamber was packed. Reporters lined the back wall, their notebooks half filled before the first question was asked. Camera's word fixed on the two men seated opposite each other. Donald J. Trump, larger than life, shoulders squared, chin tilted high, and Senator John Kennedy, calm, papers stacked neatly in front of him, his gaze steady. Trump had entered the room with theater. He waved to the gallery, grinned at the cameras, and leaned back in his chair as though he owned not just the stage but the very walls. His supporters in the audience whispered eagerly. The show was about to begin. The chairman gavelled the session open. The topic on paper was federal accountability, but everyone knew this was something else, a duel. Trump leaned into his microphone almost immediately, his voice booming. Senator Kennedy is a fraud. He talks about the Constitution, but he doesn't live it. He's weak, he's soft, and frankly, folks, he's bought. Totally bought. Everybody knows it. The gallery stirred. Some laughed, some scribbled furiously. Trump leaned back, his trademark smirk widening. He tapped the table with his index finger, savoring the rhythm of dominance. Kennedy didn't flinch. He adjusted his glasses, flipped one page of his notes, and waited for the noise to fade. His silence unnerved the room more than a rebuttal would have. Trump, sensing weakness, pressed harder. You want oversight? Look at him. He doesn't even have the guts to stand up to me. Louisiana should be embarrassed. Absolutely embarrassed. We built an economy. We built clothes, and this guy sat there and collected a paycheck. The panel shifted, some leaning back, others whispering. Reporters smelled the headline forming, Trump shreds Kennedy in hearing. But Kennedy finally leaned forward. His voice was low, calm, almost surgical. Mr. Trump, he said, if you're finished, I'd like to enter something into the record. He tapped his folder once. The sound carried. The camera zoomed. Trump's smirk faltered just slightly as Kennedy pulled a stack of papers from the folder. The pages were plain, but the header was unmistakable. Internal Revenue Service. Reporters gasped. Pens flew across paper. The gallery leaned forward in unison. Kennedy set the stack down gently, like a gavel. Since you brought up fraud, Mr. Trump, he said evenly, perhaps we should take a look at your own record. Not my words, not rumors, just numbers. Black and white. The silence that followed was heavier than any insult. Trump's smirk froze. The duel had just shifted. The smirk faded the moment the numbers hit the air. Kennedy lifted the first page from the stack. His fingers didn't tremble. His voice stayed calm, deliberate, as though he were reading scripture rather than financial entries. Schedule C, he said evenly, year 2018. Reported losses, $73 million. Net tax paid, $750. The words landed like a gavel. The gallery gasped. Reporters jolted forward in their seats. Cameras zoomed tight on Trump's face. Trump forced a laugh, waving one hand as if to swat the words away. Everybody knows the system is rigged. That's smart business. I take deductions, just like every other businessman. It's legal, totally legal. Kennedy didn't look up. He turned the page. His drawl carried steady over the microphone. Year 2019. Reported losses, $48 million. Net tax paid, $0. Not a cent. The chamber shifted uneasily. One senator leaned toward his microphone but hesitated. The laughter that had rippled earlier was gone, replaced by silence broken only by Kennedy's calm recital. Trump's voice grew sharper, his words quick. Fake numbers, leaked numbers. I built an empire. Everyone knows it. And this senator, this guy, he's using Democrat talking points. That's all this is. Kennedy finally looked up, his eyes locking on Trump. His tone stayed steady, almost cold. Mr. Trump, these aren't Democrat talking points. These are your filings, your numbers, your signature. He tapped the page once, the sound of paper against wood echoing across the room. The panel froze. Even the chairman, who had been ready to gavel interruptions earlier, sat back in silence. The weight of the documents pressed heavier than any insult. Trump leaned forward, his voice louder, harsher. You don't understand business. You don't understand winning. The IRS is unfair. Everybody knows it. They came after me because I'm successful, because I fight for the people. Kennedy didn't flinch. He turned one more page, his tone almost a whisper now, forcing the room to lean in. Year 2020, net income negative 4.3 million. Charitable deductions, carried forward. Tax liability, none. Once again, nothing. The words weren't shouted. They didn't need to be. The silence afterward was suffocating. For the first time, Trump had no ready quip. His mouth opened, then closed. He adjusted his cuff, glanced toward the cameras, then back to Kennedy. The smirk was gone. Kennedy leaned back slightly, folding the page. His last words in that exchange cut sharper than the numbers themselves. When a man pays less in federal taxes than the janitor cleaning this chamber, he shouldn't call anyone else a fraud. The gallery erupted in whispers. Reporters scribbled furiously. The panel sat frozen. Trump's words promised one thing. His own filings proved another. Kennedy placed the stack of papers neatly in front of him and pulled a separate sheet from a folder. A transcript. Not his words, not a rival's. Trump's. Mr. Trump, Kennedy said, voice steady, in 2016, you told the American people, quote, I pay tremendous taxes. Tremendous. I pay more than anyone else. He let the line hang in the air. Trump shifted in his chair, his lips tightening. Kennedy slid the transcript aside and lifted another page. But your filing for that year, Schedule A, Schedule C, Schedule E, tells us a different story. Total liability, $750. Less than the average teacher in Louisiana pays in a week. The chamber went silent. The contradiction hung like a heavy weight. Trump leaned forward, his voice sharp, louder now, as if to overwhelm the words. That's because I know the system. I use the laws. Every real businessman does it. That makes me smart, not guilty. Smart. Kennedy's reply was quiet, deliberate, forcing the room to lean in. Smart, Mr. Trump, is building something that pays people back, not finding loopholes that make the janitor pay more than you. The audience murmured. Reporters scribbled frantically. Cameras zoomed closer, catching the beads of sweat beginning to form on Trump's forehead. Kennedy turned another page, his voice calm, unhurried. Year 2018, you told supporters at a rally, quote, I'm probably the most successful businessman ever to run for president. Nobody loses like I do. And yet, he read directly from the filing. Reported loss, $73 million. Net tax liability, $750. The words were surgical. Trump's own boast twisted back against him by the ink of his own filings. Trump tried to laugh, but the sound was brittle. Losses are strategy. Depreciation, deductions, everybody knows. That's how you grow wealth. Only fools pay more than they have to. Kennedy didn't look up. He kept reading. Year 2019, loss, $48 million. Net tax liability, $0. He closed the folder gently, letting the silence settle. His voice dropped lower, almost cold. You told the people you were a billionaire paying tremendous taxes. Your documents tell us you paid less than a factory worker in Louisiana. That's not strategy. That's deception. The panel shifted. One senator whispered to his aide, but the words carried, this looks bad. Reporters caught it, scribbled it, amplified it. Trump adjusted his tie, his face tight. For once, he didn't interrupt. The contradiction was too clean, too undeniable. Kennedy folded his hands, his drawl slow but sharp. When your promises don't match your papers, the truth doesn't need my voice. It speaks for itself. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was damning. The room that had roared with Trump's voice now leaned into Kennedy's silence. For the first 20 minutes, the script had belonged to Trump. His insults filled the air. His confidence radiated across the dais, and the gallery had chuckled along. But once Kennedy laid the tax documents flat on the table, the balance shifted. Laughter turned brittle, then vanished. The chamber was no longer entertained. It was uneasy. One senator on Trump's flank cleared his throat, voice tentative. Senator Kennedy, even if these filings are accurate, deductions and losses are legal. Many Americans take advantage of the tax code. Are you saying the former president broke the law? It was a lifeline thrown toward Trump, but Kennedy didn't take the bait. He leaned forward, his drawl deliberate. I'm saying when the man who brags about paying tremendous taxes pays less than a janitor, the problem isn't the law. It's the lie, gasps rippled across the gallery. Reporters' pens scribbled harder. The cameras didn't cut away. They lingered on Trump's face, his jaw tightening, his smirk gone. Trump tried to recover, his voice rising. This is a witch hunt. The same lies, the same Democrats, the same fake news garbage. They tried this before and it didn't work. I'm richer, I'm smarter, I'm stronger than anyone here. But the words didn't land the way they had in rallies. The hearing wasn't a stadium filled with cheering crowds. It was a chamber filled with silence. And silence doesn't cheer back. Kennedy let the noise fade, then opened the folder again. His tone was cold, surgical. Page 12, Schedule E. Reported losses on rental income. Negative 3.2 million. Carried forward deductions. 5 million. Tax liability. None. Again, the repetition was damning. Every number he read wasn't just a figure. It was a hammer strike. Trump's boasts of being a self-made billionaire clashed violently with his own records. The panel shifted uncomfortably. Even members who had smirked earlier now sat rigid, avoiding Trump's gaze. One rubbed his temple. Another muttered under his breath, "This is going to play bad." Trump's face reddened. He leaned into his microphone, jabbing a finger toward Kennedy. "You don't understand business. You never built anything. I built towers. I built a movement. You sit there with papers, but I built America." Kennedy didn't blink. He closed the folder, folded his hands, and spoke with calm finality. "Mr. Trump, buildings don't pay taxes, citizens do, and citizens don't get to hide behind billion-dollar excuses when the bill comes due." The chamber froze. Reporters exchanged looks. A headline had written itself. Even the chairman, who had seemed sympathetic to Trump at the outset, leaned back in his chair, silent, his gavel untouched. He didn't want to interrupt. He didn't want to own the silence. The hearing had turned. The swagger that had carried Trump through countless clashes faltered under the weight of his own paperwork. Kennedy hadn't shouted. He hadn't insulted. He had simply read. And the more he read, the more the room turned with him. A duel meant for the chamber spilled onto millions of screens. At first, it was just a murmur in the gallery. A phone buzzed. Then another. A reporter in the back row leaned down, eyes wide, and whispered, "It's already up." On Twitter, a 38-second clip had begun to spread. Kennedy's voice, steady and deliberate. "When a man pays less in federal taxes than the janitor cleaning this chamber, he shouldn't call anyone else a fraud." The video showed Trump's face tightening, the smirk gone, his finger frozen mid-gesture. The caption beneath it read, "Kennedy reads Trump's tax docs." Room goes silent. Inside the chamber, staffers tried to look composed, but their phones lit up one after another. The control booth whispered frantic orders. "Cut to wide. Don't linger on Trump's face." But the damage was done. The moment had escaped. Trump, sensing the shift, tried to reclaim the stage. He leaned toward his mic, voice booming, rehearsed lines rolling out. "This is fake news, out of context. They're twisting numbers like they always do." But even as he spoke, the gallery buzzed louder. Reporters weren't writing down his rebuttal. They were watching their feeds, seeing Kennedy's line replayed in real time. Already subtitled, already clipped for TikTok, already framed as the exchange that defined the hearing. Kennedy didn't interrupt. He sat back, calm, as though he understood the clip didn't need his help. The silence between Trump's burst was louder than the shouting itself. By the time the chairman tapped his gavel for order, The video had crossed 100,000 views. By the time the next senator cleared his throat for a question, it was trending. Hashtags formed instantly. Hashtag Kennedy vs. Trump, hashtag tax docs, hashtag fraud or smart. Even members of the panel shifted uneasily. They weren't just senators anymore. They were extras in a clip they couldn't control. Their faces, the raised brows, the nervous paper shuffling, the glances away from Trump were all part of the viral narrative. AOC, watching closely from the dais, whispered something to a colleague. Her eyes weren't on Trump. They were on the screens lighting up in the gallery. She knew where the story was going. Trump slammed the desk with his palm, louder now. I built this country. I paid millions, more than anyone in this room. These numbers are lies, leaks, garbage. But his voice cracked at the edges. The fury didn't look like strength anymore. It looked like panic. Kennedy leaned forward, just enough for the cameras to catch his stillness. He didn't raise his tone. Mr. Trump, the numbers aren't mine, they're yours, and the American people will read them for themselves. The clip cut again. Another viral moment born. Outside the chamber, cable news Chiron writers were already at work. Trump attacks. Kennedy reads tax docs. Talk radio sees the quote. Social media looped it endlessly. What began as a hearing had become a headline. And in the room itself, the duel was no longer one man against another. It was one man against his own paper trail. Trump's words tried to fight, but his face told the story of defeat. By the 25th minute, the duel had shifted entirely. The tax documents weren't just papers anymore. They were anchors pulling Trump down in full view of the country. The room could feel it. Even before Kennedy spoke again, the evidence was written on every face around the table. Trump sat stiff, shoulders squared, his hand gripping the edge of the desk too tightly. His jaw clenched each time Kennedy turned another page, and the smirk that once danced so easily across his face was nowhere to be found. He still spoke, still jabbed with his finger, still raised his voice, but the eyes gave him away. They darted, frantic, searching for a camera angle that would save him. The panelists weren't much better. A senator who had laughed loudest at Kennedy earlier now avoided looking directly at him, shuffling papers with exaggerated care. Another rubbed his forehead, muttering something to his aide, as though willing the hearing to move on. The tension in the room was no longer hidden. It was painted across every face. In the gallery, reporters leaned in, scribbling furiously. But their notes weren't just quotes anymore. They were observations. Trump red-faced, Kennedy calm. Panelists tight-lipped, uneasy. Audience silent, no laughter left. AOC, who had been eager earlier to step in, now sat still, her chin resting on her hand. Her eyes flickered between Trump and Kennedy, but her smirk had faded entirely. She knew, as everyone in that chamber knew, that the narrative had already escaped them. Kennedy didn't push. He didn't gloat. He simply sat steady, hands folded, letting the silence sharpen around him. His restraint was more devastating than 1,000 speeches. He understood what the cameras were capturing. And it wasn't just words, it was collapse. Trump tried one last time, his voice booming. This is a witch hunt. Everybody knows it. I paid more than anyone here. Nobody's been treated worse than me. But the words didn't match the faces. The senators beside him looked down at their notes. The aides kept their eyes glued to their laptops. The gallery stayed motionless. Even the chairman, who had tapped his gavel so often before, now sat back, lips pressed tight, as though waiting for it to end. Kennedy leaned forward just once, his voice quiet, almost merciful. Mr. Trump, you can shout as loud as you want, but the numbers don't shout. They sit there, and they wait. The line hit harder than any insult. Trump froze. His lips parted, but no sound came. His eyes dropped to the papers in front of him, as if he wished they would vanish. The camera zoomed wide. The image was clear. Kennedy calm, steady, Trump rigid, rattled. A chamber full of faces that told the truth without speaking it. The hearing that began with Trump's roar ended with Kennedy's whisper. The chamber was silent. Trump's voice, once booming, had thinned into defensive bursts that fell flat against the walls. His papers sat untouched in front of him, while Kennedy's stack of tax documents remained open, Their numbers already burned into the record and into the public's memory. Kennedy didn't rush. He adjusted his glasses, leaned toward the microphone, and spoke softly, his words carrying heavier than any shout. "Mr. Trump," he said, "you call me a fraud. But tonight, all I did was read your own numbers. If paying nothing makes you the smartest man in the room, then maybe it's time the American people to ask themselves why they're the ones left with the bill." The line struck like stone against steel. Trump sat frozen, his hands gripping the desk. The smirk was gone. His jaw tightened, his eyes narrowed. But he didn't speak. For the first time in the hearing, Donald Trump had no comeback. Kennedy leaned back, folded his hands, and delivered his final line. "Your insults end here. Your taxes do not." The silence that followed was total. The cameras captured it, the panelists frozen, the chairman motionless with his gavel still in hand. Kennedy said nothing more. He didn't need to. The duel was finished. The silence itself was the verdict. Was Kennedy right to confront Trump with his own tax documents? Or did he go too far? Tell me what you think in the comments. And if you missed our last story, Chelsea Clinton caught in $82 million USAID scandal, what J.D. Vance said next shocked everyone. Go watch it now. Don't forget to hit subscribe because the next confrontation will be even bigger.